Din Tai Fung's $21 pork chop fried rice is one of the simplest dishes on their menu, and no one online is making it right. The official version looks like it has a crispy crust, but when you bite into it, there's almost no crunch. It's basically a plain pork chop that is somehow juicier and more seasoned all the way through than any pork chop you've had at a restaurant. And how Din Tai Fung does it is different from any way you've ever cooked a pork chop. So today I'll break down what they're actually doing so you can make the entire thing at home exactly the way they do. Nearly every recipe online dredges this pork chop in flour or some sort of starch right before it gets deep fried. However, if you go to Din Tai Fung's official Taiwanese website and Google translate it to English, they clearly state the pork chop is deep fried without any flour, and their own kitchen footage backs that up. DTF's UK location posted a video of them actually making this dish, and the pork goes from the marinade straight into the fryer. There's no breading station anywhere. But here's where it gets somewhat confusing. I found the materials they use to train their employees, and according to their own ingredient list, this pork chop has potato starch in it. So here's what I think is going on. This dish is Din Tai Fung's take on a traditional Shanghai-style pork chop, and the original is breaded with flour, egg, and breadcrumbs. That's the version everyone online is copying. DTF got rid of the breading and put the starch directly into the marinade itself, and what's left is way lighter than the traditional version. Before we can do that marinade though, we need to get the pork right first. Din Tai Fung is almost certainly slicing these off a whole pork loin, but it's a lot easier to just buy them pre-cut. Just about every grocery store sells these as boneless, center-cut pork loin chops, and they come in a value pack like this, which usually cost about half the price as one of these pork chops does at the restaurant. Now, when you're looking at these packs, you'll notice they come in different thicknesses. Some stores sell really thin ones meant for Milanesa, and those are actually too thin for what we're doing. On the other hand, the thick ones will work just fine. They'll just make a noticeably bigger pork chop because there's way more meat there. What I like to buy are the medium cut ones. They're usually a little more than about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch thick. Once you get them home, cover a pork chop with some plastic wrap and pound it out to about 1/4 of an inch thick. That's about half as thick as most recipes tell you to do. But if you pause Din Tai Fung's own kitchen footage, their pork chops are thinner than that. You actually want to pound it a tad thinner than 1/4 inch because as pork deep fries, it seizes up and expels some moisture, so it always comes out of the oil a bit thicker than what you started with. Now, the issue with pounding a pork chop this thin is the fibers in a pork loin are already packed together really tightly, and pounding damages them, so the meat can dry out very easily, especially if you're deep frying at this thickness. The way Din Tai Fung fixes this is that their marinade doubles as a brine. A lot of recipes have you marinate the pork for about 20 minutes or even less, and that's how you end up with a dry, mealy pork chop. You need way more time than that for the salt to work its way into the meat. That's what keeps this pork chop juicy and tender all the way through, even after everything we just did to it. And because the pork chop is so thin, the seasoning goes all the way through the meat, so every bite tastes like it was seasoned from the inside out, which is what makes their pork chop so addictive. So what is actually in this marinade? It's mostly ingredients you'd expect: soy sauce, salt, pepper, chicken bouillon, but the potato starch goes straight in with everything else. And this is the part no one does correctly. You don't dredge the pork in anything after it's marinated. You put the starch in the actual marinade from the very beginning, and you massage it into the meat so there's no dry starch left anywhere. The marinade is the coating. When you dredge a pork chop in a dry starch after it's marinated, you get a thick, crunchy coating like chicken fried steak or Korean fried chicken. The same starch does something completely different when it's sitting in a wet marinade for 6 hours. Instead of puffing up into a thick crust, it creates a thin layer on the outside of the meat. It's the same starch, but the opposite result because of how it went on the pork, which is why people who eat at Din Tai Fung all the time will tell you this pork chop doesn't even taste like it has a coating. It does, it's just so thin that it basically becomes part of the meat. To make the marinade, for every 1 pound of pork, you'll add 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of potato starch, 1 teaspoon of chicken bouillon powder, 1/4 teaspoon of table salt, and 1/4 teaspoon of coarse black pepper to a small bowl. Whisk everything together until it's well combined, then pour it over the pork chops and massage it in until every piece is coated. What you're looking for is a thin paste covering all the meat. Then put the pork in the fridge for at least 4 to 6 hours, which is how long they marinated at Din Tai Fung. Most recipes have you season the pork and cook it a few minutes later, and that's why their pork chops turn out bland. The marinade needs several hours to actually season the meat all the way through. Now, you might be wondering how I know those 5 ingredients are exactly what Din Tai Fung uses. When I dug through the training materials we talked about earlier, I found the ingredient list for the pork chop, and it's those same marinade ingredients with nothing else in it. Meanwhile, almost every recipe online is adding things like 5-spice, garlic, and sugar to their marinade. And I think it's because that's the classic seasoning for a Taiwanese fried pork chop. But that's a different dish. This is Din Tai Fung's version of a Shanghai-style pork chop, and the Shanghai version doesn't use any of those spices. While the pork chops are marinating in the fridge, we can deal with the other half of this dish, the fried rice. One of the biggest misconceptions about fried rice is that restaurants always use day-old rice. And for most home cooks, day-old rice is genuinely good advice. It really does work better in a lot of cases. But Din Tai Fung, and honestly most restaurants, use fresh rice for their fried rice. I've been saying that publicly for years, and people argue with me about it constantly. The problem is what cold air does to the rice. When you stick cooked rice in the fridge, the starches around the outside start to crystallize, and you lose that bouncy, chewy texture that Taiwanese fried rice is famous for. It's what they call the Q texture, which raises the obvious question. What kind of rice is Din Tai Fung actually using for their fried rice? According to my sources, every US location uses Nishiki, a medium grain rice you can find at Walmart or pretty much any grocery store. And to be clear, you can make fried rice out of any rice you've got in your pantry. Jasmine, long grain, they all work. But the Q texture we just talked about, that only comes from a medium or short grain. Once you've got your rice, give it a few rinses under running water until the water is mostly clear. Medium grain rice is really starchy, and all that starch makes the grains clump together when you fry them. So washing it off is essential. For cooking the rice, every restaurant kitchen steams their rice in a commercial rice cooker. But I know a lot of you don't have a rice cooker at home, so I'll show you how to steam it with stuff you already own. All you need is a pot with a lid, a heat-proof bowl, and something to lift that bowl off the bottom of the pot, like a steaming rack or a metal cookie cutter. Add your washed rice to the bowl along with an equal amount of water by weight. Pour in a few inches of water into the pot and bring it up to a boil. Then set the bowl inside. Put the lid on and turn it down to a simmer for 20 minutes. Then kill the heat and leave it alone for 10 more minutes, so the leftover steam can finish evenly cooking the rice. And rice steamed with this method is every bit as good as what comes out of a commercial rice cooker. Each grain is perfectly cooked, evenly hydrated, and there's no undercooked rice on the top or a burnt layer stuck to the bottom of your pot. If you are using a rice cooker, first off, respect, but just cook it on the harder setting if yours has one, or with a little less water than usual if it doesn't. The full amounts for everything are in the recipe linked in the description below. The only thing left to do before we cook everything is cool this rice all the way down to room temperature. If you try to make fried rice while the rice is still hot and steaming, all that trapped moisture is going to make your rice sticky and clumpy. So spread it out on a baking sheet and fan it out, turning it over every few minutes so the moisture doesn't pool underneath. What you're doing is drying out the surface of each grain while the inside stays chewy. This is how you keep that Q texture we were talking about earlier. The rice needs about 20 to 30 minutes to cool down, and that's the perfect amount of time to fry these pork chops. So grab them out of the fridge, and you'll notice that the marinade has turned into a thin paste that's stuck to the meat, with a little bit of liquid pooled at the bottom. That's just what you want. Let's start by heating a large pot or a wok of neutral oil to 350 degrees. Once the oil is up to temp, lower in one pork chop at a time and leave it alone until the surface sets. When it goes in, it's going to look like it's almost bare, like the coating is missing. That's because there's no dredge on this pork chop. All the browning comes from the soy sauce the meat has been marinating in for the last 6 hours. Soy sauce is loaded with sugars and amino acids that help with browning, and potato starch barely browns at all. These only take about 4 to 6 minutes total, so once the edges start to brown, flip the pork chop over. And you're really going by color here, since it's not possible to jab a thermometer into something this thin. You want to let it brown to the point it looks almost perfect, but pull it out when it's slightly lighter than you want it to end up, because the coating keeps cooking and darkening even after you take it out of the oil. When it looks good to you, lift the pork chop out and let the excess oil drip off, then set it on a wire rack. And you should always fry these as close to when you're going to eat them as possible. The marinating part though, you can do that several days in advance. I do that all the time and eat them throughout the week. But the pork chops themselves are best just a few minutes after they come out of the oil. Now, I know a lot of you hate deep frying at home, and cooking oil isn't cheap. If that's you, the traditional way to make these pork chops is in a pan on the stovetop. Remember, this dish comes from the Shanghai-style pork chop, and that original version has always been pan-fried. The method is almost identical, with a couple of small changes. You'll just add enough oil to come about halfway up the pork chop, and once it's hot, lay in the pork chop so the crust can set. Then bring the heat down to medium and slowly let it brown. The biggest difference is that in a shallow fry like this, the pan you're cooking in actually matters. This is the 10-inch ZWILLING Peak ceramic hybrid frying pan, and the pork chop you're looking at right now is frying in it. every non-stick cooking pan has the same problem. The coating that keeps the food from sticking also prevents it from browning properly. But ZWILLING's Peak series is different. These hybrid pans have a raised stainless steel pattern that sits above the cooking surface, so the pork chop is browning directly on the steel. The rest of the surface is a PFAS-free ceramic coating, and that's what keeps your food from sticking. That raised stainless pattern is what helps us form a proper crust on our pork chops. The body is also tri-ply stainless, and that means there are no hot spots anywhere on this pan, so the pork can cook evenly. And when you're ready to flip it over, that thin crust releases from the pan in one piece. I actually pan fry these pork chops more often than I deep fry them because it's faster and the cleanup is way easier. ZWILLING has been making kitchen equipment since 1731, so they know what they're doing. And it comes with a limited lifetime warranty. If you'd like to take a look, check out the link in the video description. Thank you to ZWILLING for sponsoring this video. By now, the pork chops are done and the rice should be cooled all the way down to room temperature, so we can finally make the fried rice. Now, one of the things that sets Din Tai Fung's fried rice apart from most other Chinese restaurants is they don't use any soy sauce. This is a very light, very subtle fried rice because their entire philosophy is about bringing out the natural flavor of the main ingredient while using as few seasonings as possible. And one of the ways I know there's no soy sauce in the rice is Din Tai Fung's own allergen guide. If you look at their fried rices, none of them contain gluten, except one, the pork chop fried rice. Regular soy sauce is brewed with wheat, so it has gluten in it. And the only soy sauce anywhere in this dish is in the pork chop marinade, which can't be removed. So if they're not using soy sauce to flavor the rice, what are they seasoning it with? The answer is a blend of dry spices they call house seasoning. So for every serving of rice, you'll add 1 teaspoon of chicken bouillon powder, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and a 1/4 teaspoon of MSG. For the chicken bouillon powder, I like using Lee Kum Kee's version in the red tin, although any chicken bouillon powder will work here. It's the same one I was using when we marinated the pork earlier. Now, one note on the MSG. Din Tai Fung has stated they don't add MSG directly to any of their dishes, but that it is in some of the powdered bouillons they use. So I like adding it to my fried rice because it does make it taste better. And I'm not running a restaurant, don't have to report to anyone, so it's whatever. To cook the rice, let's start by heating a large wok over high heat until it starts smoking. Then turn off the heat, squeeze in about 1 to 2 tablespoons of a neutral oil, and swirl it around so it coats the wok. This is called long yao, and that cool oil hitting the hot metal creates a thin layer that keeps the eggs and rice from sticking when we fry them. Then turn the heat back onto medium and pour 2 unbeaten eggs into the wok. Let them set for just a second, then break them up with your spatula and lightly scramble them. The reason you don't beat the eggs first is because you actually want little pieces of white and yolk in there instead of one uniform color like an omelet. When the eggs are about 60 to 70% done and still a little wet, add 1 1/4 cups of the cooled rice. Then work the rice into the eggs and mix everything together thoroughly. I like switching to a small silicone spatula here because it lets you break the rice apart with a cutting motion while you keep it constantly moving. That cutting motion is what fries each grain individually and really lets you separate the rice, which is especially important with a rice that's very sticky like medium grain. And as you're frying, if you notice any browning, turn the heat down. You don't have to do this at a super high temperature. You'll notice the rice turning yellow, and this is why we left those eggs unbeaten. All that loose yolk is coating every grain of rice as you fry everything together, which helps keep the grains separate. A lot of people swear Din Tai Fung puts butter in their fried rice, but the color is just egg yolks. In Chinese cooking, they call this technique silver over gold. When the rice looks right to you, toss in the house seasoning from earlier and work it into the rice, making sure all the spices are evenly distributed throughout the rice and no dry seasoning is visible. Then add the white and light green parts of 1 to 2 thinly sliced scallions, toss everything together and turn off the heat. Give it a taste and adjust the seasoning with extra chicken bouillon, salt, or MSG. Now, fair warning, if you're cooking for the whole family, make this in batches of 1 to 2 servings at a time. Because if you dump in a bunch of rice, it'll steam instead of properly frying, and you'll be left with rice that's soggy instead of the nice, fluffy, separate grains we just made. And that is Din Tai Fung's basic fried rice recipe. To serve, scoop the rice into a bowl and lightly press it down to form that dome shape they use at the restaurant. Then put a plate over the bowl, flip the whole thing over, and lift the bowl away. And that's how Din Tai Fung makes their rice dome. Then cut the pork chop into about 5 or 6 even strips and top it off with some freshly cracked black pepper. Now lay the slices right on top of the rice like this. Look at this pork chop. The crust is so thin it's basically a part of the meat because it went on as a marinade instead of a dredge like everyone else online is using. And that's it. This is Din Tai Fung's famous pork chop fried rice. Now, let's give it a taste test and see how we did.
It tastes exactly like the pork chop they serve at the restaurant. And in spite of how thin it is, it's still juicy and every bite is seasoned all the way through. What I love about Din Tai Fung is how simple but how delicious their food is. It really shows you that with the right techniques, you can make incredible food with very few ingredients.
If you want the perfect palate cleanser to pair with this fried pork chop, check out my Din Tai Fung cucumber salad video right here. Thanks for watching. See you next time.